Role reversal. A theme that's being conveyed very well in Top Boy. And specifically, I'm going to be elaborating on the role reversal between Dushane and Sully. As the series has progressed, Dushane has become more and more narcissistic, and he has less of a conscience and is less empathetic now. Whereas if you look back in season 1, for example, when Ronell, I'm sure you guys remember Ronell, he was one of the main characters in season 1. Like, Dushane took a liking to Ronell. There were several points, for example, where Dushane called Ronell a smart kid. He even tried to recruit him, and when Ronell made a deal with Dushane to sell weed to him, Ronell made a deal with Dushane to sell weed. Dushane agreed to it. He did say, though, this is a one-time thing. I'm not going to allow you to become my competition. This is not going to happen again. But nonetheless, for that one time, he agreed to buy Ronell's weed. Whereas Sully, on the other hand, he never really liked, nor did he care about Ronell. It was actually Sully's idea to rob and steal Ronell's weed anyway. And if you guys remember, Dushane was totally against that idea. You could even tell from the facial expressions that Dushane made when Sully brought up the idea to rob Ronell, that Dushane was totally against it. Nevertheless, though, Sully went ahead with the idea. He stole Ronell's weed, and he ends up getting into a little scrap with Leon, because Leon came in and intervened. So Sully ends up getting into a scrap with Leon. He pulls out the strap and he shoots Leon dead. And when you actually think about it, when you actually deep it, Dushane didn't even like the idea of killing people, because even when they identified who the snake was back in season 1, that bald guy, he ended up being the snake. When they figured out that it was him, that was the snake, Dushane was very apprehensive and hesitant to kill the guy, to pull the trigger. But Sully gave him a nudge and pushed him and said, do it. And that kind of forces Dushane to pull the trigger and shoot him. So Sully's trigger finger was always itching, whereas Dushane, that wasn't always a straightforward and easy decision to make, killing people. Not saying that he would never kill people, because he did kill people in season 1. But that was always more, back then at least in season 1, that was more of Sully's lane than it was Dushane's. But anyway, the main point is, Sully back then in season 1, he was a lot more ruthless than Dushane. Not saying Dushane wasn't ruthless at all, because he was, but there's levels to ruthless though. There's levels to ruthless. Also, Sully, he didn't have as much of a conscience as Dushane did. Dushane definitely had more of a conscience in season 1. Sully didn't really care if kids got hurt, if innocent people got hurt and died. He didn't really give a damn. But that was until Sully met Jason in season 2, and his relationship with Jason was like a big bro, little bro kind of relationship. I remember the scene where he meets Jason, and that scene was actually hilarious. The scene where he met Jason. Jason was like, "Oh, give me a pound," and he ends up stealing. Sully ends up giving him a pound, but he ends up stealing Sully's phone and runs away. That was quite funny, that scene. But Jason, he came from a very, very poor family. He had an abusive dad. His mum was a hoe, and his mum was hooked on drugs as well. So he had a lot of misfortune in his life. And you could tell that Jason kind of reminded Sully of himself, and that's partly why Sully liked him so much. Sully looked after him, he protected him. For example, when Sully's dad was beating Jason up, Jason ended up calling Sully, and Sully beats up Jason's dad. And whenever they would go out to get something to eat, to grab a bite, Sully would always pay. Sully was like a big brother figure to him, really. So it was from the whole relationship that it was from that whole big bro, little bro thing between Sully and Jason, where you saw that Sully's character started to develop and change, especially when Jason died. He started to have more morals, and he grew a stronger conscience. Sully, you grew a stronger conscience, similar to how Dushane was in season 1, and he became a bit less sociopathic relative to how he was before, though. Because obviously, Sully was still killing people. He was still a sociopath, but relative to how he was before, he was less sociopathic, you could say. And Further proof of this was when in season 3, for example, when Dushane came up with the whole plan, which involved coercing Ats, who was Jamie's little brother's best friend, and he ends up coercing Ats to put a bag containing a product in Jamie's house, and Sully was totally against that. Like, he said it was wrong, we shouldn't do this. He was totally against that idea. He didn't want to get innocent people involved. Whereas season 1 Sully would have been totally on board with that idea. He would have been totally on board with that plan. So, but Sully now, season 3, do you know what I mean? He was totally against it. So it just emphasizes how much Sully has evolved throughout the seasons. Sully's become more like Sully's become more like how Dushane was in season 1. He's become more like season 1 Dushane, and Dushane has become more like how Sully was. Like, Dushane in season 3 has become more like how Sully was in season 1. So yeah, that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about in this video. So if you've enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, all of that stuff, and until next time.